Fantastic. So we're going to get started very soon. Just get an okay from the technical team. Hmm? Oh, David, so we can begin? And, okay. Okay. So, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. We are going to benefit from the experience and the expertise of a leading international law firm today. We will be talking to a partner in Washington, and we have Anne-Charlotte Rivière here with us in Paris. You're a partner in the Paris office of Descartes, which is the legal company which we are going to tap into the expertise of this afternoon. So perhaps, David, I can turn to you and ask you to give us a little bit of a description. No. By phone. Always reminds me of I was putting on a show in Spain, and it was with quite a large audience, about 350, 400 people. And the show really bombed. It was a total disaster.
Thank you.
I was in the bar afterwards, and a friend of mine came up and said, you must be really disappointed, it was really tough, nothing really worked. And I said, I'll tell you the rest of the joke afterwards. But so are you with us again, David?
I am. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon. So go ahead and present Descartes to us. Yeah.
Yeah. So delighted to be with all of you. I'm here in Washington, D.C. I'm a partner at Anne-Charlotte. And one of the messages I would say to begin with is, so I'm in the embassy section of Washington, looking out on Obama's house to my right, and 4 doors down is Ivanka and Jared, President Trump's daughter. And I don't want to sound like Trump, but I think the message I would have generally is, and I don't want to sound like Trump for many reasons, but in the life science space, business has not only continued as usual, it's actually been quite strong. And so as a general matter, what Anne-Charlotte and I have seen, she's based in Paris and me based in Washington, and I haven't been on a plane since January, okay? But the business has been remarkable. And I think, no one would have thought in the first 2 months that we would have, anything close to the activity. So without getting into specific deals, the simple message is I've never actually seen life science as strong as this in I don't know when, and I would have bet you a large amount of money this never would have happened. So those are my introductory words.
Thank you, David. So maybe, and Charlotte, you can give us an idea of what you've been through over the past few months.
Yes, so we've been working on several transactions over the pandemic period. Some of them were actually more complicated than usual. We feel that there was lots of opportunistic deals as well going on. So companies that did not really
opportunistic because of COVID, because of the situation?
Because of the situation, because of the uncertainty of the future. And because it was uncertain, people had to decide whether they would go through a transaction now or wait and see. And so that pushed certain companies to raise money a little bit earlier because the money was there, maybe to do a smaller round, but to close the round when they could.
Because there was a certain amount of urgency in the situation?
Not necessarily for them, because they had lots of cash and they could go through, but they knew that they would need to launch a new fundraising by the end of the year, and they didn't know whether there would be a winter of financing or not. So they needed to take action, and that's what they did most of the time. Maybe the second thing that we have foreseen in those transactions is that the wave hit the world at different time. And so we had transaction with European, transaction with Asian people, and transaction with the US. And the dynamic of that was very different. We had a transaction that really slowed down before the European lockdown because it was with Asia. And when we were locked down, we had a very large amount of work with them, while 2 or 3 weeks after our lockdown in Europe, US transactions started to slow down because of uncertainty, because people had to take time just to handle the crisis.
So David, when we see these more opportunistic or, let's say, inspired by the situation, these transactions, have you also noticed the difference between transactions coming in from US, coming from Europe and Asia, coming at different times? Has it also been part of your experience, this?
Yeah, so the one thing I want to do is make sure that I leave with a memory. This is like one of those old perfume ads. I can't remember which company now, but I remember the ad. It was, I don't know where I end and you begin. I don't think that we can actually say that we've seen different trends across Europe and the U.S. I'll give you a great example. One of the largest collaborations we did, which was announced in April, is a French and Austrian-based public company called Valneva. It did a large collaboration with Pfizer, received $130 million upfront. This is all obviously a public deal. It was a cost sharing of an enormous pivotal trial, north of $500 million, for Lyme disease. That deal was going to happen no matter what, because Pfizer recognized the advantages of a vaccine for Lyme disease. It hadn't been, the last vaccine was GSK in roughly 2001. So so the pandemic, frankly, didn't change anything other than that, and we did it all, over Zoom calls. Okay, so in terms of sort of timing, I'd put that in the category of that deal is going to happen no matter what. There was an expectation of Pfizer that one day there will be a vaccine, and we will get on the other side of the pandemic. And I'd contrast that with, you asked the question, have there been situations Yeah, yeah. And so that Valneva deal with Pfizer was something where, the pandemic wasn't going to adjust it other than, no one ever met. I mean, it happens, I know all the folks at Pfizer, so I'd met them before, but we weren't going to meet. Okay, this is getting. Yes.
Our lockdown told us pens down. We have a 60 days where we're going to focus on other things, and then we're going to start again. And that's exactly what happened. I think it was just the reallocation of human resources, actually, rather than a debate on whether they would transact or close the transaction.
So when you look at the different recent deals you've done, what for you are the ones, of course, with thinking about confidentiality and what you can say and what you can't say, but give us some kind of indication with the recent deals that you've had here in Paris and the messages that come out of that. What kind of trends come out of those recent deals? What kind of significant features come out of those recent deals?
Well, maybe I'm going to compare the life science and the other sector of the financing because the trends were not the same. We are working on venture transaction on other deep tech companies, and there you could feel a lot of pressure on the valuation, but also on the closing of the transaction. But when it was in life science, you could always feel that people were carrying on doing the investment, the investigation. We signed term sheet, we closed deals. It never ended and it never stopped, differently. So my feeling, but that's my own theory, is that perhaps it's because in the life science sector, you have very long trend. When people invest, they know that they're going to divest 7 to 10 years after that, so the pandemic is going to be over.
So they're people who are thinking in terms of long-term strategic plans, and obviously with the complexity of putting a drug on the market, you do need to think in terms of long term.
Yeah, and I mean biotech and medtech companies, they usually don't have that much employees, so they are very agile. They can adjust. And so that's also part of it. And I think that the French government really helped, with all the measures that they took so that the company can carry on their work and move forward. Most of our clients that were in the life science sector, they did not work remotely. I mean, they had labs, they needed to be on-site rather than off-site, and so they carry on almost the normal way.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I heard in different round tables was that for some people it was a very active period where they were working with teams, they were working on research, they were working on bringing things to the market. So it wasn't a time of doing nothing or just working remotely, as you said. But what particular deal struck you as being significant during this period?
Well, we advised DNS Script, for example, in the context of their extension of the Series B. And that was an example of the opportunistic deal because they did not really needed the money straight away. But some very high-profile investor knocked to their door, and so they listened, and the board listened. And so they actually did an extension of the Series B that was much larger than expected because of that.
And DNA Script, what do they do exactly?
I'm going to do it, say it with, with a legal touch.
Right.
They synthesize DNA.
Okay, okay. So,
And so they are launching their tool, and so they were actually very active, and they are based in France and in the US, and so they are active in both continents, and their investors, they are European, Asian now, and also US. So it's getting all over the world.
right. I don't know, we don't have a contact. Yes, we do. Do we have a contact with David?
Oh, I'm back. If you can.
Oh,
hear
you're
me.
back. That was perfect. So we're just talking now about what specific deals you had recently that really caught your attention and were for you significant of major trends that you see in the market.
Yeah, so I'd summarize it this way. People should be biotechs that have late stage drugs that are about to be approved, or specialty pharma that have revenue. People should be thinking about royalty finance. Probably the biggest example of that is the Blackstone Ferring spin out of Fairteam. Is Blackstone sort of put together a support for that spin out of roughly 350 million. That was right before the pandemic. You can see Blackstone Life Sciences continuing to do those deals. And you're also seeing straight conventional royalty finance. So, that's one deal, the Blackstone Fairteam spin out. Second is the collaborations. Those have been going great guns, okay? And again, the example of the Valneva Pfizer that we worked on, that was 130 million up front for the biotech. That exactly as Anne-Charlotte has said. There's been no difference because people are assuming there will be, we're going to get to the other.
Okay, so we have an intermittent contact with David, but I think he concurred on several of your points. And what strikes me, I mean, what are you back again, David?
And then this the last thing, optimistically, this is like the pandemic. We all have to suffer through it. Horrible. So, look, we have actually seen biotechs who are in a position where we do have to do deals. And a lot of European and US VCs have been very aggressive about doing the Series B through D financings.
I think we've lost him again. David? So, yeah. So we have an issue with intermittent communication with Washington, but we're doing our best. Are you back again, David?
Yeah, I am. But I'm going to just echo what Anne-Charlotte said. On the financings of biotechs, there have been a lot of these in Europe and the US who work together, have been very aggressive on doing a lot more venture rounds. But I think it's probably fair to say most of those rounds have had lower disappointing valuations. Because biotechs, if you're a biotech, what do? You lose money. That's all you do. Every quarter, you lose money. You burn cash. And the pandemic, particularly in the first 2 months, it was horrific. I mean, we literally saw some biotechs that, unfortunately, the French government was more generous than the U.S. government in the amount of support for the biotechs. The money was minimal. I mean, I worked on one as a great example, pretty average. They finished a round of about 70 million B round. They got a grand total of 1.5 million of our government money. It's like nothing. That was like 2 months to avoid firing employees. So, if this pandemic extends another year, I worry a lot about a lot of biotechs. They're going to get crushed.
What's your perspective on that? Do you think that the French government protects more biotechs?
Well, I don't know if they focus on biotechs, but they are certainly very concerned about the employment. That's one thing. And also you have something else you need to keep in mind. It's the salaries are much higher in the US than they are in France. So actually the cash burn of US entities or US sub or just US companies is usually much higher. This also explains why the round needs to be much larger in the US than in France to actually reach the same level. After that, we've got other issue about financing Series B and C in France, which is another topic. But the cash burn and the agility of French biotech is probably higher than US one, just because they don't burn as much cash.
And is it true that in France, is it in your experience, is it true that you have this growing trend for collaborations, for partnerships? Is this something that you see more of?
Yes, I think that the strategic now have a real eye on French biotech and medtech companies. So they identify technology that they want to take as a license. And to be honest, talking with US clients, investment fund or strategic, they just tell us that it's cheap in France, or at least cheaper than in the US. And the valuation are not the same. And they can say it as well. This is why French startups try to flip to the US in order to anticipate an exit and have a higher valuation when they sell themselves. But this is also why US investors and strategic are coming to do their shopping in France.
And so when you look at what's happened over these past 6 months, this year that we've had, this really particular year that we've had, 2020, there have been also a lot of regulatory changes. How important have they been, these regulatory changes?
Well, in France at least, there is one that can really have an impact on investment, which is the foreign investment approval. We talked a lot about the fact that they lower the threshold of acquisition to 10% for listed companies. So that was a measure that was done in the context of the pandemic to avoid companies to exit France. But more importantly, there was a change that entered into force in April that provide that any investments that is more than 25% of the share capital of a company, when it's done in concert with foreigner and when foreign investors are predominant in that concert, needs to go through that approval. So that has not been implemented too much. And to be honest, on our side, most of the time we had companies where foreign investors were higher than 25%. So that's why we escape the approval. But if companies that are short of cash, that really need to raise the money, needs to go to that process, that really jeopardize their ability to raise money quickly and efficiently.
Right. David, I don't know if you're with us. Yes?
I am.
Yeah. So what's it been like in the States in terms of regulatory changes?
Other than what I'll consider minimal government funding, we haven't had any changes of the sort Charlotte's describing in France. I mean, that's probably the difference, the only difference I see. Look, life science it's a global business, right? It's really simple. You clinically develop molecules, you go put them into the clinic in humans, and then you see whether the data is sufficient to get it approved. That same approach to how you get drugs to market. That's in Europe, that's in America, that's in Asia. Asia may be a little easier to get through the regulatory process than America or Europe, but it's all the same. So I don't really see meaningful changes. But I just want to highlight a point that Anne Charlotte said. Look, a lot of European biotech, France included, are looking to go to that because you get higher valuations. Why is that? People say things because, you know, they're more specialty firms that focus on publicly traded biotech. That doesn't really make sense to me, but that's the answer people give. But it is what Anne Charlotte said. Valuations of public companies in the U.S. that trade on NASDAQ are higher than if you look on the various exchanges in Europe. And as a consequence, you know, a lot of Europe's best and brightest biotechs eventually get an additional listing in the U.S.
And so when you look at the the people that you see in the States in the biotech industry, you mentioned that they're to a certain extent vulnerable at the moment and they're burning a lot of cash. But you obviously see, I imagine, companies successfully dealing with the crisis. Are there any key success factors that you see or trends that you see in those who are better maneuvering during this very specific period of time?
Yeah, it's real simple. Again, you have to have strong data. And so yesterday we filed an IPO for a particular biotech led by three of the well-known investors that are behind that IPO. It'll raise between 150 million and 200 million. They have remarkable data off of a phase 1B that has efficacy on 2 different drugs. And so you need the data, you know, and how do you get the data? You know, it happens because this is oncology. The clinical trials in the hospitals have continued. What I do worry about, and I think the experience is a little different when I listen to clients in Europe versus America. Depending on the part of the country you're in America, hospitals have closed to clinical trials much more so, I think, than in Europe. Like in Texas, where my brother has a big business in various hospitals in the Midwest. You know, the further north he goes out of Texas, the more closed the hospitals are. When those hospitals are closed, you can't run your clinical trial. You can't run your clinical trials, you don't get data. And I think Europe has been much more open to running clinical trials that are not like sort of the worst health threats, you know, cancer. So that's probably, you know, if we had a sociologist amongst us, they'd probably drill down and look at the experience, you know, country by country, state by state, about how clinical trials are being affected. Because doing phase 1 trials just for dose range findings and safety, those aren't getting done anywhere near as much as they were a year ago.
So what you're saying is that strong data is a determining factor. Would you agree with that, Anne-Charlotte?
Yes, definitely. And I concur with David. We have seen some companies that have delayed in their clinical trial because of hospital shutting down and not being able to actually pass certain milestones that they needed to pass. And I agree as well that it will be a challenge of the next few months, because if the situation stays like that, and if, for example, they are looking for an FDA approval, then it's going to be very tricky, because they're not going to pass the milestone, and then it's going to be problematic for the fundraising.
Right, and is this, do you think this is something that is known at a political level? Are people really aware of this, do you think, of the pressure that's now being put on the biotech ecosystem as such?
I'm not sure that the governments are that aware of what small companies like biotech or medtech that are early stage or developing their drugs are going through in terms of financing. There are lots of lobbying in order to bring awareness to them in such respect, but we can see that the adjustments that are in the legislation, for example, are not sufficient to really take into consideration the specificities.
So, David, if you're still with us, just a few words about the future. How do you see things panning out in the future? Obviously, you know, nobody has a crystal ball, but what do you see happening?
Yeah, look, I'm like Anne Charlotte. I can't read a patent. Most 8-year-olds know more science than me, so I couldn't possibly guess that we'll have 2 or more vaccines by the spring 2021. But the folks that I work with, they seem to uniformly believe we'll have at least 2 different vaccines. You remember with polio, we had a succession within, I think it was about 8 years, of the first and then the second vaccine, and we've largely eradicated polio, as Bill Gates and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation sort of attest to, everywhere, maybe with the exception of a few countries in Africa and Asia. The development of vaccines for the COVID, coronavirus-based pandemic is extraordinary. You listen to people, Dr. Fauci, our leading infectious disease expert, who's constantly at battle with our president, who I hope is not president too much longer. He seems to think we'll have vaccines by the spring. So do I think that's going to happen? Yeah, I'm going to bet with him. And I think, look, we're going to get over this crisis. And the markets are behaving, again, as Anne Charlotte says, people are behaving as if the pandemic is solved. It's not solved, but people are taking a midterm and beyond look. And that's and that's why we're busy. We shouldn't be busy right now, but we're busy.
Well, that's good news, right? And Charlotte, how do you see the future?
Well, positive. I mean, in life science, we always had lots of activities, and I'm pretty sure that we will carry on that path. I think that what we've seen, when it was really locked down, was that the activity carried on and people renewed the way they were working, but were carrying on. So I'm pretty confident it will stay like that, even if the pandemic is a bit longer than expected.
So, David, thank you so much for being patient with us with the technical issues we've had. Just a few wrap-up words. What would you like to say? What would be your takeaways for this session?
Yeah, look, we're a law firm. We're advisors, like anyone, investment banker, management consultant. We'd love to work with those who have issues in terms of doing financing, how to finance those clinical trials and how to roll out the commercial undertakings, to market drugs, med tech, as well as small molecule and biologic, and reaching out to Anne Charlotte and to me and to others. That's the shameless pitch, and it's good for business, it's good for shareholders, and let's not forget the real reason people do this. And I know it's why Anne Charlotte and I work in this area is, you're trying to help patients. You're trying to find cures for diseases that right now, people don't have adequate tools for. So that's the pitch. The business is going on, and we'd love to help as people develop that.
Thank you, David. And Charlotte, a few words of conclusion.
That's very difficult because we said a lot of things already. So a few words of conclusion would be that hopefully we're going to carry on exactly the same path and helping those companies raise money, because when they raise money, then they can hire, then they can develop their drugs, and then they can carry on that positive path.
Thank you very much, Anne Charlotte, and thank you very much, David. And again, thank you for your patience with the technical issues. Thank you.
Likewise. Good afternoon, guys.
Bye.
So thank you.
Good.